Hey everyone, I'm going to continue talking a little bit about my running of B4, The Lost City by Tom Moldvay, and how that game and the open table structure is going. Just as a review, I am running The Lost City in an open table style, meaning anybody can show up any given week. And I'm using the original module from the original printing, but I'm also transcribing it as I go to 5th edition. I actually was in my local gaming store and saw that there was a 5th edition version, and I had been concerned about transcribing Zargon the correct way, so I just went to that page and took a picture. Shh, don't tell anyone. But anyways, I've previously done videos on session 0 and 1, and then session 2 and 3, so this is the video on session 4 and 5. Now, one of the challenges that I've run into and with the open table style is buy-in. There's a lot of people who want to play. There's slightly fewer people who do play, and there's even slightly fewer people who play, close to every week. And I get it, everyone's busy, and that was kind of the accommodation that I was trying to run in using an open table campaign. But the challenge is that sometimes we just don't get a lot of people. And the last session 4 here and session 5 are good examples of that. We had 2 players in each of these sessions. And actually currently where we are in the campaign, we had to cancel one of our regular meetings just because we didn't get enough people. And it was to a point where there were maybe a lot of people that were needed. And so that's kind of where I am with open table. It's been working well, but there's less buy-in than maybe a normal campaign. And it's been, there's been just a few challenges in getting enough people to the game where everyone is interested in playing. And, I don't think that's dissimilar from my group normally. We're all people with families and or a bunch of other responsibilities, and so not everyone's available every time we want to sit down and play. So anyways, on to these sessions. In session 4, this was an interesting one. So we had 2 players throughout the whole session, and both of these players are very creative players, and it was really fun to run this game. The first thing they did in this session is they wanted to identify how many tiers the pyramid was, because they entered at the top tier of the pyramid and they worked their way down, and they had only found tier 4 up to that point, so they hadn't been down to tier 5 yet. And so outside the pyramid, they counted the tiers. They actually found the doors, the external doors to tier 5 of the pyramid, but recognized that it was, covered by tons and tons of sand, and it would take an army of people to remove the sand. But they were determined to find tier 5 so that they could get the experience. And that kind of goes back to something I've talked about earlier, in that I have milestones for experience with this module. So I added a whole list of different ways the characters can gain experience. And one of the main ways in running this game is every time they find a new tier to the pyramid, they get experience for that feat or for that milestone. And that's been really good. Using player motivation to get them to do the things you want them to has been something that I found is very beneficial. So in this session, after they were done exploring outside, they went back inside and they explored a few rooms. They did a lot of hit and runs as far as some of the monsters in there. They'd go in, maybe kill a rat and then run away, or go in, fight a zombie and then run away. With only 2 players, they were very cautionable. They're very cautious about not dying, which I get, and they did a pretty good job of that. By the end of session 4, they had explored a lot of things. Oh yeah, I forgot. One of the cool things on tier 4 of the pyramid is that there is a rolling ball trap. Think Indiana Jones, where the ball starts rolling down the hallway and Indiana Jones has to try and outrun it. That's exactly what this is like, and it's a very cool part of the module. It's a very interesting trap. It's supposed to be scary and not lethal, and so the characters and players did a great job of finding it and identifying what it might be, and eventually identifying what it is and how to trip it. One of the characters had a whole bunch of ball bearings with them, and so they just put some on the floor and realized that the hallway was on a slight incline, and they were able to deduce that something would probably come out of this little alcove that they had found. So it was very interesting watching them solve that problem, and then they did end up tripping that and then just getting out of the way as this big scary boulder came crashing down the hallway. By the end of the session, the group had really found a lot of rooms down in tier 4, and then monsters in those rooms, and run away. They did a lot of exploring. They had not yet found tier 5. I'm going to double check that. No, they did find tier 5, that's right, because they found the map. Down in tier 4, there's a map in one of the rooms which leads them to the ladder going down to tier 5, and they did indeed find tier 5. They were very excited about that. They got the experience, and then there's some snakes down in one of the initial rooms in tier 5, and they realized the snakes were maybe a little out of their range of ability to fight in combat, so they avoided that. I learned a lot in this session about running the Lost City. The first thing I realized is one of the characters playing in this session had not joined any factions, right? And they were adamant that their character would not do that, which I totally get and I respect as a playing decision. Now, I've talked previously about how the factions are so important because they offer resources for the players. They offer a way to turn this from a survival module into an exploration module, and also they offer a way for players to spend all of the gold and treasure that they find. So the importance of these factions is that the players get mixed in somehow. At this point, though, the factions were completely intertwined in the story, as most of the characters had joined a faction, and one of the characters, in fact, had secretly joined all three factions, unbeknownst to the factions themselves. And so there's going to be drama down the line with that. But what I realized is this character, and maybe one or two more who are a little bit more reluctant to join these factions, they were missing out. The factions were kind of gatekeeping the rest of the adventure from them because they had loot, but they couldn't spend it. They wanted to upgrade their gear, but they couldn't, or at least buy gear that wasn't broken. And so I ended up basically removing first of all, some of the faction restrictions. I think I also previously talked about that, where, you know, some factions have, they only accept thieves or fighters. And I just said, you know what, join whatever faction you want. But second, I also said, you know what, this character has been walking around with a faction member this entire time. Why wouldn't the faction trade with this character? So now non-faction members can trade with factions. They don't get the best prices, they don't get the best gear, but there's no longer like any gatekeeping by the factions. You don't have to be a faction member to spend your loot or to get access to these items or anything like that. So that was the first thing I did, and I think that's good advice maybe if you're planning on running the Lost City. If the factions become intertwined with your adventure, you can start removing or reducing some of those restrictions so the factions become a resource for everyone. The second thing that I really think this module does a great job of in this session, was a good example of, is just exploration and creativity in exploration. Like I said before, the milestones that I set up to gain experience really allowed the players some motivation, even in a session where there was only two characters, excuse me, and they weren't sure what they could do as far as not getting killed. Exploration was still an avenue for them to explore and explore the game and explore the pyramid and still get experience without having to kill everything. So I do suggest that as well if you're going to run the Lost City, is figure out a way to give characters experience through exploration or other means that doesn't always involve combat. Now, moving on to Session 5. Session 5 was another session with only two characters, but this one had a bit better of a fighting group of characters, and so they were a bit more willing to fight some different monsters. And they immediately had a plan, because one of the characters had not been done to Tier 5 yet, and so they wanted to go and get that experience. And so they did much what the group in Session 4 did, is they did a lot of exploration, they did a lot of hit and runs with different monsters, fighting a few monsters. They did win one encounter, and so they enjoyed kind of being in the spotlight a little bit with the combat and really getting to try out all the different things that their characters can do. Near the end of the session, they did get to Tier 5. They saw the snakes. They realized the snakes in Tier 5 were going to be out of their range as far as their ability to fight or have combat, and so they ended up fleeing back up. But this was this was an interesting session, because I talked to them afterwards, and one of the players had a ton of fun. He's new to D&D, and he loved the fact that he had the spotlight, you know, half of the time instead of a quarter or even 20% of the time throughout combat and throughout the role-playing scenes that we were doing. So he had really enjoyed the two-player version of this particular adventure. The other player that was in the session is I've been playing D&D with for a long time and is definitely more experienced. And he had fun, but he was like, you know, I'd really prefer if we have 3 or more people, because we can do more in combat, we can do more and engage more in the pyramid. Because he felt they were just kind of running a lot, and it was kind of formulaic: open a door, shoot a few arrows in, run, and things like that. So it was interesting watching the two different experiences from two players with different experience levels of Dungeons and Dragons. And one of the things that I realized is I need to do better as a game master at really making sure that the resources are there no matter the party makeup. So one good example is one of the things I do behind the scenes is I repopulate the rooms. So if the characters clear a room, in the next session, there might be other monsters in there. There might not be, but there might be. And I kind of base it on the Wandering Monster table and a few other things. And the problem is, I don't know, I've told the players before, but I don't think they remembered that. So when you think about a session with only 2 characters, they could go through and start figuring out who's moved into this new territory, who's moved into these rooms that they've previously cleared. They didn't know that was the case, and I think that's one of the mistakes I made as a game master so far, is I really haven't played up the territorial aspect of this living dungeon. They're aware that things are happening behind the scenes. They're not aware that there's other monsters moving into these rooms, and I'm wondering if there's a way I can make that a little bit more clear to them. The second thing that I should have done a better job of is these characters are involved with the factions, and the factions have fighters and magic users just kind of sitting around. And one of the things I've been clear about from the I wish I would have been more clear about from the beginning, is that the characters can hire faction members to help fight. So in this particular case, they could have gone out and hired a few members of the Warriors of Medusa or the Brothers of Gorm to make sure that their party was then strong enough to win some of these battles. And I think that that is something that I could do a better job of making sure my players know going forward, that, hey, these factions aren't just places where you can buy things and get, use your gold, but they're also, people you can interact with, characters you can interact with in the dungeon. So that's something I want to do a better job of going forward. And again, in this session, one of the big standouts again was the alternative ways to earn experience. Not all about combat, it's about the different milestones they were hitting, and that's been a big hit so far for the players in this module. So that is sessions 4 and 5. I hope that if you're running the Lost City, that you find these recaps helpful. I'll be back sometime in the future with sessions 6 and session 7, and things start to get a little crazy as the characters adventure deeper into the pyramid. They find a little bit more about the pyramid, and in session 8, a character ends up getting captured. So I'm excited to cover that with all of you. Thanks for listening, and I'll see you in the next video.